Update 4.1 brings us 4 new weapons and refines. This time we have new skills for Rebecca, Henry, Leif, and Cordelia. You can grab these new weapons for SP on a 5-star version of each unit, except for Leif since he keeps his light brand. To get their special refined effects, you will need to spend 200 Divine Dew, which is costly, so be sure you understand what you're getting into before investing. This is a rather interesting batch, but there has been a lot of talk about some of these weapons. When looking over Cordelia's weapon in particular, I myself had a lot of questions about it, so for this video I will talk about her last, because I'm gonna ramble a bit while discussing it. Had a lot to say about it. Alright, besides that, we'll cover each weapon and refine with some build ideas and general playstyles, so let's get right into things. First up, we have Rebecca, who got her own unique bow. Just on its own, Rebecca's bow is a 4 TMI bow that accelerates special trigger, so it's a stronger slaying bow, nothing crazy. For its special refine, if a bonus granted by a skill like Rally or Hone is active on Rebecca, she will get a +4 to all stats during combat. Basically, if Rebecca has any field buffs on her, she will just get even more stats to use. Now this is a real simple weapon and refine. Everyone likes faster specials and it's great for pretty much any build you want to make. Turns out everyone also likes buffs, and it's a very common strategy to use, especially helpful for units like Rebecca, who don't exactly stand out much. You can see from her stats that Rebecca isn't exactly tearing it up offensively or defensively. She only has 29 attack, which is not amazing, but 34 speed is at least workable. Her defensive stats are not crazy either. 37 HP, 21 defense, and 27 res isn't exactly screaming for a defensive build. All in all, Rebecca really needs any extra stats she can get, and if you give her field buffs, then she can double down on all those stats. This effect can be used for any build you go with, and the same applies for the accelerated special trigger effect. That means build variety is extremely high, but the main focus will be giving Rebecca buffs in some way. Naturally, if we are going to be buffing Rebecca up and she doesn't really need any specific stat, then bonus doubler will be a lot of fun. Ideally, we give Rebecca all the field buffs possible, and then bonus doubler doubles them, and then Rebecca's bow adds another +4 to all her stats. For example, if we give Rebecca a +6 attack buff, bonus doubler is going to add another +6, and then the bow adds +4. So for that one +6 buff, that's going to turn into +16. Do this for all her stats and Rebecca just becomes a big ball of stats. For the other fun skills, you can give her a lull skill like low speed and defense. That way the enemy doesn't get to use their field buffs and Rebecca gets an even bigger stat advantage. You can top it off with a self-buffing C skill like the new Oath skills or a sacred seal like even defense wave, and Rebecca can help buff herself to activate her bow. Obviously the main drawback to this weapon will be the panic status, so you must be careful of that. This will apply for any build utilizing the special refine. As mentioned, build versatility is going to be super high for Rebecca. Nothing is really a must-have since her weapon can work with anything. Here are some builds I'm just going to throw out there. If you want an offensive speedster, the good old Fury plus Desperation combo is always available, and Rebecca would love the extra attack from something like Brazen Tag and Speed. If you want to utilize more specials, you can use Special Spiral or Flashing Blade in a build. Rebecca can even become a support buffer since there are skills that can buff herself and her allies. For example, you can use a Link buff. They can give Rebecca +6 to 2 different stats, and you can even run a wave buff or 2 for a third stat. If you want a slightly more selfish buff, you got the Rouse or Oath buffs, which are powerful but definitely hard to get still. Joint buffs are also very easy to use, but again, they are pretty premium options. Overall, Rebecca's bow is okay. It doesn't really give Rebecca a specific niche since any unit wants field buffs anyways, and accelerated specials are everywhere on all types of weapons. It doesn't help that her stats aren't outstanding either. Her speed is probably her best trait. Regardless, this weapon offers a lot of build freedom, so if you do have a highly merged Rebecca and you like to use her, then you can go wild with her build. I know there are those of you with some pity breaker 5-star Rebeccas possibly merged a couple times, and sadly she's not that much more enticing to use. She's not bad, but I wouldn't say she's going to be flashy unless you run around with bonus doubler and +6 field buffs. Next we have Henry, who got the CORVUS tome. This is a 4 TMI tome that is the same as a Raven tome. It grants color advantage over colorless units, which means a 20% attack boost against them, and they're also going to receive -20 attack penalty against Henry. Nothing crazy here, but it is worth mentioning that Henry is clearly meant to be a bow and dagger counter. He has exceptional HP with decent defense, so he can use a Raven tome quite well. If you pick up the special refine at the start of combat, if foe's attack is 3 or more than Henry's attack stat, then inflict -6 attack and res on the enemy, and also inflict -1 special charge per attack. Now this is quite the refine. Looking at Henry's stats, you'll notice that he has an absolutely garbage 23 base attack. That is tied for 3rd lowest in the entire game. Unfortunately, Henry is also not fast either, and his res is nothing crazy. All his points go into HP and defense, and this refine does help improve that tankiness. With CORVUS Tome equipped, Henry's only gonna have 37 attack, and if his enemy doesn't have 3 attack more than that, then that's equally as sad. Basically, this weapon should be perma-activated, and the -6 attack and res debuff is exactly what Henry needs. He gets to deal more damage, and he'll take less too. Adding on guard is also really strong since Henry is going to get hit twice a lot, and if he can prevent a special from activating, that helps keep his HP up. Overall, Henry's defensive capabilities get a solid boost, any unit losing -6 attack is not going to be happy, and built-in guard is super handy these days. All of this is nice, but if you want to build up Henry, a main concern may be a lack of damage. His low speed is also an issue. One answer to those problems can be Triangle Adept. It turns Henry into a purely colorless and green counter, but he will get that extra attack and further bolster his defenses against those units. Henry needs some serious help in the damage department, and without a special primed, he won't be doing much unless the enemy has really low res. With Triangle Adept, Henry gets that much needed attack, and he can one-shot some colorless or green units, but he needs a ton of help to do so. You're going to want to give him attack boost, although maybe that might push him out of Corvus Tome's activation range, so maybe you want to limit it to in-combat attack buffs like Fierce Stance or Drive Attack. With his low speed, Henry will also probably want Quick Riposte in almost any build, but you can go for a breaker skill if you want. You do have to be careful of those though, because Bow Breaker and Dagger Breaker do not work on colored bows and daggers, so that's rather unfortunate. Maybe just stick with Quick Riposte. Now for something that I would only recommend if you're really invested in Henry is a close counter build. His decent defense will be nice for fighting swords, axes, and lances, plus with the -6 attack debuff, Henry can really start to shrug out some hits. You want to go with Quick Riposte and Bonfire, since if Henry gets doubled, that way he can fire Bonfire off on his second counterattack. For his Sacred Seal, things like close defense are fine, but I do think Henry wants some extra attack, so a Bond skill can be another option as well. If you really want, you can go with Special Spiral so that Henry can counter with Ignis specials, but he's going to need to proc it once to really get it going. I would only recommend doing this if you're going to give him something that lowers cooldown beforehand, like Infantry Pulse or Dual Alphonse's new dual skill. For the most part, while Henry did get a solid weapon, his base stats are so poor besides his HP and defense that I would only really expect to see any usage from players who plus 10 him. He will get doubled often, and tanking 2 hits isn't always ideal unless he really specs for more defense or uses Triangle Adept. He would make for a pretty neat tank, but without a Bonfire or Ignis proc, his damage is not going to be great. If you want a close counter mage, it's kinda hard to compare to Winter Tharja, who can also use Vengeful Fighter. I wouldn't underestimate Henry if you try to tackle him with a colorless attacker or a green unit, but I also don't imagine a lot of people are going to want to build him up and fully invest in him. Our third weapon is Leif's Light Brand. It retains its same base effects, so Leif gets an additional +3 defense, and if the foe's defense is 5 more than the resistance, Leif is going to deal an additional +7 true damage on hit. If you pick up the Special Refine, Light Brand will then accelerate Special Trigger, so a permanent -1 cooldown to Leif's specials. Also at the start of combat, if the enemy has 100% HP, Leif gains +4 speed and defense during combat. This is a pretty nice refine. Leif really appreciates those accelerated specials because he has S-Drink as his personal B skill that's going to grant -1 cooldown on turn 1, so with other special cooldown reducing skills, Leif can have a lot of fun. As for the additional speed and defense, they go to good use. Leif is rather fast at 38 base speed, and he's going to have 33 defense with Light Brand equipped. If he fights a full health foe, which should be pretty common, he will bump those up to 42 speed and 37 defense. Now that is pretty nice. Overall, I think this refine offers Leif some interesting build options. Personally, I was hoping that the defense to res comparison for the base effect was lowered, because these days you see a lot of super tanks with balanced defense and res stats. Still, if that effect doesn't trigger, Leif now always gets faster specials, and he can get extra speed and defense, so I think those are great incentives to use the weapon. If you want to be a mad lad, Leif can potentially give himself -4 special cooldown at the start of the battle. Light Brand and S-Strength give effectively -2 cooldown, and Leif can also use Quicken Pulse as a Sacred Seal for a 3rd point of cooldown. When not easy to obtain, Leif can then use Time's Pulse as his C skill for that 4th cooldown charge. With 4 cooldown, Leif can instantly charge a special like Ignis, and with all the extra defense Light Brand offers, this is going to be a hefty Ignis proc. To make things even crazier, add Sturdy Impact for that additional +6 attack and +10 defense, and that just gives Leif a huge nuke if he initiates combat. While fun, downfall of this build is that S-String and Quicken Pulse are essentially useless after turn 1. if you have Time's Pulse, then Leif can at least guarantee that his next Ignis starts at a 2 cooldown or less. There are alternatives for this setup, but Leif needs ally assistance. You can replace any of these skills with Infantry Pulse, Legendary Hector's Ostia's Pulse, or even dual Alphonse's dual skill, which is -2 cooldown. Time's Pulse would be the most useful to keep, but it's also the hardest skill to get, so yeah. As usual, S-Drink is best in multi-map content, and that applies to Quicken Pulse or Infantry Pulse as well. These skills work every turn 1, so that means -4 cooldown for Leif every new map, and you can always use something else like Astra, an AoE special, Aether, or even Gale Force. If you're looking for another fun A skill, then Flashing Blade 4 is great. It's +5 true damage, stacks with light brands +7, and Leif is relatively fast, especially with a speed boon. You can also make use of the new Swift Sparrow Sacred Seal. For B skills, a lot of things go well with Flashing Blade 4, Desperation is awesome, or you can go with the special cooldown route with Wrath, Special Spiral, or S-Drink if you want a stronger first encounter. This is a lot of special cooldown however, and there are other options like Vantage or a low skill. Finally, I want to talk about a defensive build. Leif can stack up on speed and defense, especially since Steady Posture 3 makes its debut on the next banner. That's +6 speed and defense on the enemy phase, plus built-in guard. You can then use the Steady Posture Sacred Seal, and if Leif fights a full health enemy, he gets even more speed and defense. In total, this would be +14 speed and defense on the enemy phase, but if you want to be even more annoying, add in Close Call for that potential 40% damage reduction. This can help if you aren't building for resistance, but of course, you can always just swap in res boosting skills like Swift Strike instead. Leif can also run a player phase version of this setup too. He would just use Steady Blow in the A slot, which he actually comes with, and either Swift Sparrow or Steady Blow as a Sacred Seal. It doesn't exist in the game yet, but Brave Force Blazing Durando did get what is essentially Steady Impact for its Refine. That's going to be +7 speed and +10 defense, so if that ever becomes a real A skill, then Leif would love to have it if you wanted those stats. Lots of fun stuff is on hand for Leif and his light brown Refine. I think the slang effect is really awesome, but the extra stat boost doesn't hurt either. Our last new weapon is Cordelia's Lance, and as I mentioned at the start, we got a lot to talk about. Cordelia is definitely one of the best 3 to 4 star summonable units in the game since launch. She has some amazing base stats for an offensive flyer, and she is incredibly versatile depending on the type of offensive weapon or build you give her. For a unique Lance, Cordelia returns to her roots because this is a 10 Might Brave Lance, and it only inflicts a -2 speed penalty. When she initiates combat, she will attack twice. Now Cordelia's Lance is actually insanely good on just its own. Remember that you can get it on a 5-star Cordelia just by using SP, so for anyone using Cordelia with a Brave Lance already, you basically get a free upgrade. 2 extra might is awesome, and an extra 3 speed makes the Brave Lance speed penalty less noticeable. What has been a bit controversial is the special refine for this weapon. If you spend 200 Divine Dew, then at the start of combat, if Cordelia has more than 70% HP, she gains an additional +4 attack and speed during combat. Now at first there doesn't seem to be an issue here. Now Cordelia has a 14 Might Brave Lance, and she actually gains +2 speed instead of losing any. To put things into perspective, because of that additional +4 attack, Cordelia can match Church's attack even though her personal axe has 11 might and she has 3 more base attack. The problem stems from the above 70% HP condition. Because of her other unique brave weapons with lower speed penalties, like Cordelia's Lance, they are clearly pushing for a quad attack build. That means stacking tons of attack and speed and then using Desperation to pull off 4 uninterrupted attacks in a row. Desperation only activates under 75% HP, so Cordelia only has a 5% HP window where her Lance's Refine overlaps. Any lower and she loses that extra +4 attack and speed. This is rather disappointing since it's a clear lack of synergy and would have been so much better if Cordelia just had Swift Sparrow as a Refine like Alencia's a midi. That being said, this does not ruin the weapon in my opinion. You can still run the quad attack build just fine, but if you do choose the special refine for Cordelia's Lance, then it's not a perfect storm of skill effects. So for playstyles, Cordelia previously could run a multitude of offensive setups. She could easily run Brave Lance builds, Fire Sweep builds, or even a Sling Lance build if you wanted an easier Gale Force setup. With your unique Lance, she's going to be more locked down to the Brave weapon playstyle, so this weapon may not be for everyone depending on how you used her previously. First up, this weapon and the special refine are super good for any builds that just want to 2-tap enemies. A plus attack non-merged Cordelia with her Lance Refine active and Death Blow 3 already hit 58 attack. You can then add on an attack boost and Sacred Seal plus an attack field buff. Brave weapons are just a ton of fun since you can delete a target instantly, and with a stronger Brave lance, Cordelia just gets to do that better. Since builds can get kinda crazy these days, if you want extra protection for Cordelia, then Sturdy Impact and Sturdy Blow are nice for the extra defense and follow protection. This might be good if you want to run Gale Force and need Cordelia to take a hit, plus it could keep her above that 70% HP threshold to retain her attack and speed boost. You can also just use Swift Sparrow if you want, but if you want the extra speed, then you might as well go all in and use the Swift Sparrow seal as well. This special refine front loads her damage into a really strong first round of combat, but when Cordelia takes a hit, she loses those extra stats. However, Cordelia can still quad attack on her first round of combat. We don't need desperation as long as she can survive the enemy's counterattack, we just need more speed to double. If you want to make sure something dies, 4 attacks plus a special proc is probably going to do it. You can take the special refine if you're okay with Cordelia losing that +4 attack and speed when she gets hurt, and honestly she is so good base stat wise that this is not going to ruin her by any means. Going for that big bang quad attack goodness would be great on a Wings of Mercy defense team since Cordelia can just hang back, and if the enemy isn't careful enough, she can hopefully get a cheesy KO. This is not a tricky setup by any means, it's just using the power of raw attack and speed, and that's sort of the Brave weapon playstyle in general. Overwhelm the enemy with sheer damage. Last, I just want to discuss some things I was thinking about when reviewing this weapon. First off, if you do want to do the quad attack build with desperation, are you just better off with choosing the +3 speed refine instead of the special refine? That way you can keep the extra 3 speed even at below 70% HP, and of course desperation is dependent on the extra speed to activate. I'm gonna say that sure, the speed refine is probably better if you really want to abuse desperation with quad attacks. However, there is some merit for using desperation with the special refine. For one, it gives Cordelia stats before she reaches desperation HP range. If you are running with a brazen attack and speed seal, then this way Cordelia can have bonus stats for above or below 70% HP. You could also just go with the Swift Sparrow seal and regain +8 attack and speed before losing health, and still a respectable +4 attack and speed when in desperation range. You also have to remember that Cordelia's lance is already stronger than a regular Brave lance, and if you were using a normal Brave lance before with brazen attack and speed, then running Cordelia's lance special refined with Swift Sparrow would get you very similar stat boost with the benefit of having way more attack and speed before hitting desperation range. I hope that makes sense. Another question I had was, if we aren't quad attacking, then why not just use a Fire Sweep Lance? I think this is a valid concern since a Fire Sweep Lance has 15 might and no speed penalty. Cordelia's lance with the special refine can hit 14 might with +2 speed, but she has to be untouched for the most part. A Fire Sweep Lance solves that issue since the enemy cannot counterattack, but ideally, Cordelia's lance does the same if the enemy dies in 2 hits. However, things are not that simple, especially with some of the much tankier enemies in the game. For example, if you use Fire Sweep Lance, you avoid Vantage completely, and if you do not KO the enemy, you at least avoid any counterattack damage from builds that use Quick Riposte or fast special charging. Meanwhile, failing to KO with Cordelia's Lance in 2 hits can cause issues if it's a really tough enemy phase unit. Fire Sweep Lance seems like a safer weapon overall. However, Cordelia's lance allows her to fight on the enemy phase, which brings me to my last point. The special refine and weapon in general gives Cordelia at least some enemy phase potential. A Fire Sweep Lance is useless on the enemy phase, but Cordelia's lance with the refine active essentially gives her a 14 might lance with +2 speed, and that's much better than a 8 might Brave lance with a -5 speed penalty. In some hilarious twist, I think this special refine might actually be most useful to anyone who still uses a Brave Lance Cordelia with her default Triangle Adept A skill. If you think about it, if she has to stay healthy, then Triangle Adept can help with that since any red foes she fights deal a lot less damage. She also gains a ton of extra attack to burst down red enemies with her 2-tap, and on the enemy phase, she has much more attack and speed to counter better. I don't think anyone with a +10 Cordelia is still using her with Triangle Adept since it ties her down to a specific niche, and Cordelia is so good normally that if you're fully investing in her, she can take on more than just red enemies. Triangle Adept units are generally budget options, and if you're just using a regular non-merch Cordelia for that role, are you really gonna spend 200 Divine Dew for an extra +4 attack and speed? Probably not, but I'm not gonna stop you. I mean, I'm one of those players who hasn't built up a Cordelia at all, and yet I still liked her a lot just with a Brave Lance and Triangle Adept back in the early days. Alright, that's enough rambling for now, let's end this video. What do you guys think about our new weapons and refines? For Henry, I think he got some much needed help, but his low starting base attack isn't a great look unless you plan to plus 10 him. For Rebecca, she didn't really have a certain niche beforehand, and well, she's not exactly going to change that. Good multi-purpose abilities with accelerated specials and extra bonus stats, but it's not anything crazy. As for Leif, well, he can definitely have a ton of fun if you focus on specials. My only real concern is that the light branch true damage effect, which it always had. It's awesome if it works, but a lot of tanks like to have balanced defensive res stats, so that can be an issue. For Cordelia, her lance has pros and cons, and not everyone is going to like it. I'd like to hear what you would do with it if you are considering picking it up. Personally, I actually would have liked to see it help her activate Gale Force easier, since that's Cordelia's bread and butter, but I think it's still a decent weapon. Honestly, the base weapon is already a really great buff if you want a Brave Lance build. Thanks for watching, I'll see you guys next time.